Go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Major Causes and Solutions for Downtime. My name is Eddie Rule, and I'll be your moderator. I'm the technical intern here at Total Computer Solutions, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. Total Computer Solutions is a full-service provider of IT support and services, including network security, cloud computing, network administration, and managed backup services in Central North Carolina. I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Andy Purcell. Andy is our business consultant at Total Computer Solutions. He has over 20 years of IT and security consulting experience. He is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Additionally, Andy has held certifications from VMware, Citrix, EMC, and is a Cisco Business Value Specialist. This invaluable combination of education and experience helps Andy find TCS clients the right solutions to grow their business. Before I hand the mic over to Andy, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation and the Zoom platform. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and will be emailed to you afterwards. Next, we would love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up afterward. So without further ado, Andy, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Eddie, and welcome to everybody who's joining us both live and on the recorded versions of the presentation. Today, we are talking about major causes and some solutions for downtime. I'm sure we could come up with a million of these, but they fall into a number of fairly neat categories, and we'll begin our discussions there and then can move on to questions at the end. So if you do have questions, please type them into the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. To go ahead and get started, I want to look at the overview of what we're going to discuss today. And the 4 key points, or the 4 key sections that we'll go over are calculating the cost of downtime. How do you figure out what it really means to be down? We think, sure, it's just delaying some stuff. Maybe some people have to work from home. Maybe we do tomorrow what we don't get done today. But if you really look at the cost of your operating expenses, if you look at what it means to not be able to produce, ship, see clients, see patients, whatever your industry is, it is probably the single biggest expense of downtime. We want to then look at what causes it. And there are lots of very common examples, some of which we'll cover and some of which we'll delve a little bit deeper into. And then we'll follow that up with the importance of backups as well as disaster recovery, and then avoiding the network interruptions, the things that you can't necessarily control, but you do need to account for and plan for. So that's kind of the structure or the outline of our presentation as we go through today. So as I mentioned a moment ago, you've got hard costs and soft costs for when you're not operating. So obviously you've got employees that are sitting in an office or a manufacturing environment who are not able to perform at least some of its functions or tasks of their job. And then you have whatever it costs you in not being able to produce your product or service or deliver that product or service. So as we begin framing the conversation in those terms, I do want to go through a bit of a math exercise here to help us understand what we're talking about. So the first area of cost or expense when you have downtime is the direct expense of employees. So it's the people that are working for you, the people that are in your environment, the people that you're paying a wage or compensation to. So we want to look at 3 numbers, and please feel free to do the calculations yourself. If you're watching it after the fact, you certainly can pause and go through this, but I think it's a worthwhile exercise. So you look at first the number of employees that you have, the number of people that are impacted by having downtime. And then you calculate what you're paying them, whether this is a salary, whether this is an hourly wage, however you calculate that. What is the value of each person monetarily? And then you take a look at the average of their productivity. So is this person someone who is 100% working with technology, and if that technology is down, their productivity loss is total? Or is this someone whose task perhaps involves other things, if they're seeing patients, seeing clients, or doing a manufacturing job, what is the percentage of that productivity is lost. So it could be 0 to 100%, depending on what their task is, depending on what they're able to do while they have downtime. So if we go through and multiply those first two, how many employees you have, what you're paying them, and then you'll multiply it by that percentage. And so that will give you your total hourly cost or your total cost for that employee being unable to work due to whatever downtime has occurred. So that is the first calculation of what downtime costs you. The second that we arrive at is looking at how much revenue do you use. So this is, do you lose rather. So this is not what you're paying somebody, this is what you're not producing. Again, clients you can't see, patients you can't treat properly, equipment you can't use, and then also, of course, anything that you can't ship out, sell, or have clients come into your business if it's a retail environment. So what is your gross revenue? Just take the top line, what did you make last year? Figure out how many days are you open. Is it every day, or 360 days excluding holidays if you're a retail environment? Is it 260 days if you're looking at 5 days a week? And then how many hours? Are you open 12 to 15 hours in retail or potentially some other industries, or are you open 8 hours a day? So you're going to calculate then what is that revenue divided by the days that you're open, divided by your hours per day, and that's going to yield the loss of revenue each day. So we've calculated so far the people cost, and then also the revenue cost. And then, as you can imagine, to arrive at our total cost, we're simply going to combine those two values. So what are you having to pay people who are not able to work due to downtime? And what are you not able to create in the way of revenue during downtime? If you think these numbers are a little high, I'd be very comfortable if you want to cut those numbers in half and look at that figure. I think it'll probably startle you how much downtime would cost you, how much not having technology would affect your business. And these are just the hard costs right off the top. You then get into other areas. If you're not able to deliver product, does your customer go elsewhere? If you're not able to perform your service, they have to get that service somewhere else. Is there a revenue hit? I'm sorry, is there a hit to your reputation as well as the revenue? If you're not always viewed as dependable, are there other people out there who use more so? Do you have competitors that will point to your downtime and say that's something that they can help avoid? So there are going to be some soft costs in addition to the hard cost of the downtime that we mentioned. So just right off the top, take a look at that number, keep that in mind as we go through the reasons and the costs and how to prevent some of the downtime, and understand that there is a monetary value regardless of whether you want to cut that number in half to determine how large it is. As we go into the causes, there are categories here as well. I'm sure we won't hit everything today that could affect you, and I'm sure we could get into all kinds of crazy examples that have affected other businesses. But I do want to talk about the top handful that everybody can most easily identify with. Social engineering really comes down to actions that take place outside of your organization. This could be an email incident like ransomware or some sort of a phishing attack. This could be someone outside maliciously getting into your network and intentionally causing trouble. This could be someone internally doing something by spite or because they feel like they're going to be let go because they're leaving the company. But these are actions that people take against your organization. And typically it comes from outside, and typically it does result in some sort of a breach. And then that may result into you losing dollars. You may lose downtime, as we've been discussing in the traditional sense. You may lose reputation, or you may simply get the hassle of having to deal with this and have to make up for whatever you've lost during this time. So a great example of this comes from Mecklenburg County and in Charlotte in particular. They had a phishing attempt, and this has been several years ago now, in 2017, a phishing attempt where someone clicked on an attachment in an email, and as a result, it launched some malicious code within their systems that locked down 48 servers. It was not ransomware in the traditional sense at that point, because they didn't just ask for money, they actually infected the servers with a virus and with malicious code, and then they demanded not just to decrypt, but to remove that code. So it sort of is the double whammy of ransomware and phishing at the same time. What impact did this have on the county? Obviously, the county's not really providing a product, but they are providing services. And if you think about the licensing that takes place, are you not able to give licenses, whether they be business licenses, marriage licenses, phishing licenses, anything that you could come up with, the server for that was down. If you think about cameras, traffic cams, if you think about what you can't do for police, fire, any of those emergency systems that are controlled by one of those 48 servers. If you want to talk about even the day-to-day functioning of the county itself and their employees and operators sitting in the county office building, they were not able to do that. So this was a pretty total shutdown. And they were able to go back in some cases and use hard copy, hard files. And that was able to allow them to limp along, but certainly they were not moving forward in any way. Now, the ransom in this case was pretty minor for the county and what it cost them, $23,000. They refused to pay that just on principle. And so the cost to them was much, much greater, as they had to look at each of those servers. They had to roll back to backups if they had them and where they had them, had to rebuild some of those servers. And then they had to go back both and rebuild the goodwill as well as catching up on the work that did not get done for the citizens of the county. So I'm sure we have other examples. I know it's been a little closer to home. Rockingham County had the same kind of incident, I believe, with their school system. Businesses around this area and nationwide have had the same kind of attacks. But social engineering, again, defined as acts by individuals, by persons, either within or outside of your company, is probably the #1 cause of downtime today. And that's why we spent a fair bit of time here discussing it. The obvious in the old school, and the first you think of really downtime is hardware failure. And this both is and is not the most common, because you really today don't have a lot of machine downtime. It happens, but it's not as common as it used to be. But we do still have the effects of hard drives going bad, parts going bad. We'll talk about the network later on, but this could be related to a network downtime. So it's not just your servers, not just your PC. These are switches, these are routers, these are Wi-Fi controllers in your environment. So hardware failure is not just what the picture shows here, the guts of a server. It is, in fact, any of the pieces of technology within your organization, also including the firewall. So if you're not able to process that traffic, nor are you able to filter and protect that traffic, you have to now throw in the firewall into the switches, routers, and also hardware and PCs that can go down in a hardware failure. So just something to think about is that world of hardware increases as well as our reliance upon it. The next area is software failure. Now, software failure also has evolved over time. And our software could live on a server at our office. Software lives on the laptop I'm using today. It lives on your PCs that may be in your environment, but it also lives in the cloud. So you've got to take into account not just your immediate environment and the software that you're clicking on from an icon from your desktop. You have to think about what's happening on the back end. You have to think also of the firmware that's sitting on a firewall or on a router. So keep those up to date. Make sure that you're updating and doing your patching on your PCs on your server. And as you think about that, it may be a good idea to have a company like TCS does, who can evaluate what those patches are. Maybe there's a 1-week quarantine time before you install those patches. And the reason I say that is this: if we're patching or making a change, let's say to one of the functions that help visually impaired individuals do voice to text, if that's not something that you have in your environment, that's not necessarily something you need to update on as a regular basis, because there is always the chance that when you update that voice to text capability, you could break something else elsewhere within the operating system or on the individual device. So one of the services that we offer here is that quarantining of those patches, usually for a week or so, and then doing that installation as needed, depending on the individual environment or machine. So as we think about that hardware failure, it's not just the software failure, rather, it's not just, my database isn't functioning properly. It really does become a larger, more holistic picture of What do I update? When do I do it? How do I keep it current? And how am I affected by what I have in the cloud? That cloud software isn't functioning because of an internet outage here or at the cloud service provider. It has just as large an impact on your business as the old days where everything was stored on a server in a closet on site. The last one, and obviously the most dramatic example would be a natural disaster. The pictures that you see here are a client of ours about 10 years ago after the tornado came through. It actually is the tornado that did a lot of damage in the Stoneville area, if you're here long enough to remember that. It was very real, very damaging. This customer happened to be right in the path of it, and it caused them a significant amount of downtime. And because that was in the day of having hard servers in your office as opposed to in the cloud, the IT director made several trips in and out during the storm, grabbing server boxes and carrying them out. So while we do not recommend that as a disaster recovery solution, we do recommend that you put DR policies and have good backups as a way to combat this. So that is very dramatic and very real. This, as you see here, is a pretty extreme example. Now, we talk about what happens. You know, we've given all the examples of what it costs you. We talked about how it occurs, but now what do you really lose? And so what do you have to ask if we have downtime, if we have power go out, if we have a natural disaster? This is sort of the tree of questions to ask yourselves. Are we able to communicate? Are our phones VoIP phones where if power goes out, we're unable to work? A simple solution to that is cell phones that we all have today. It's using the apps like Microsoft Teams that allow you to communicate more directly or via cell phone network. Same thing with your email. If your email is on an Exchange server in a closet, then it's going to go down if you're hit by a disaster or a power outage. If your email is stored, for example, at Microsoft with their 365 product, you're still able to get that email on your phone or in a laptop that you can take to another location. You can then go home or go to your local Starbucks or Panera and be able to receive that same email. Same thing, you know, mostly today websites are stored offsite, stored at a provider's location. And I would add the servers themselves being stored in the cloud now. And most of us at least dipping our toe into the cloud pool, and many of us being fully cloud enabled. And so that allows you to work and function sitting at home or sitting at another location, just as you could sitting in your office. So therefore the communication and some of those work functions are able to continue even if the office has suffered from an outage or a disaster. And that moves right into the can we work? Can we access that data? A data sitting on that server database like our client in the path of the tornado, most definitely no for them. Even if the server survived the storm, once you had to remove that, it's got to be set up elsewhere. Your applications. Obviously, if you've got the Microsoft suite on 365, it's going to function anywhere. But if you're still installing that, or your accounting system, if you're still installing applications on site locally, they're most likely going to be down. Whereas if you have those cloud enabled or wholly stored in cloud or functioning in the cloud, they're going to continue to work for you. And then, do you have paper files? If you do have paper files, a lot of folks are moving away from those. Some of them are keeping them as backups. It is a bit of an old system, but it still functions. So you're going to have that if you're able to access the facility, if it's not a natural disaster, but rather it's just some sort of a power outage. So can you still do that? Those are the questions. And then maybe more importantly to the outside world, can you deliver your product, your service? Can you see your clients? Are you able to reach your suppliers? Are you able to still keep business up so your competitors not take away that business from you while you're suffering from your outage or your downtime? And is there a physical space? Is there a backup workspace? Is there an offsite storage where you have goods, materials, and that kind of thing? So as you go through the process of what do you need to look out for, it's almost like there are these three levels. There's the communication, there's are we able to function as a business, and then how are we able to interact with suppliers, customers, and competitors. So sort of keep those in mind as important points as you look at how do we avoid the downtime, or how do we operate or recover from downtime. And that takes us at this point into the discussion of your backups and what your strategy is there, your disaster recovery plans, and then the functionality of how it operates, and then how to avoid the network interruptions. That's the internet outage. We talked earlier about your in-house network or your Wi-Fi system going down because of hardware issues with switches, routers, and your wireless controllers. So that's another big issue that I'd like to talk about here. And just to go over a few things to illustrate the importance of this, a third of companies that do have backup strategies and DR strategies don't test them. Okay, so it's critical as we go through what your strategies and potentials are and how to execute on them. It is also critical that strategy include a test. We would suggest every 6 months to a year at a minimum, maybe a quarterly test. Are you able to download those backups and reinstall them or rehydrate them on a server? Are you able to make them as functional as you would have been without having incurred any sort of an outage or a downtime? And then, because even within those third who are testing them, 3/4 of them fail when they try to go ahead and reconstitute that data and move forward with it. So it is critical that you not wait until the outage occurs or until you have downtime to test the efficacy of the backup system. And that's certainly something, again, where we could talk with you further and figure out if what you have is sufficient and what changes you might need to make. Second little tidbit here, 60% of the organizations that lose the data for a week or two end up going out of business. And certainly, that's a frightening thought, but at the same time, think about industries that are down for 10 days. What would you lose, both in the physical sense that we talked about in our first couple of slides, but also what would you lose as far as reputation? What would you lose as far as the business from your customers going elsewhere? But if you think about it, 6 in 10 companies who are down for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks are not able to come back up and realize the same level of success that they had before. If it's a physical problem with a hard drive, usually you're going to have to send that hard drive off and they're going to charge you $2,500, $5,000 to take a look at it. That's just to see if it's recoverable. So whether it's been encrypted from ransomware, whether it's had a physical problem and it has to be replaced, those are very important to take a look at. Usually a physical problem will be covered under your warranty. So it's a great example of keeping the warranty current once the initial warranty expires. It's also a great intro into talking about wanting to keep your hardware up to date and on a regular refresh cycle so that both your hardware from a PC and a server standpoint are current, and then that they're also on the proper operating system, and that you refresh those usually 3 years for PCs, 5 years for servers. You can stretch that a little longer with extended warranties, but it's not something you want to really take a chance off, because there's a significant cost of a drive failure, as well as the cost inherent with a ransomware attack or a phishing attack where they get in and corrupt your data. So when we talk about your disaster recovery plan, we talk about backups, we think of them together because it really is two halves of the same solution. So on the front end, you want to back up your data. This could be customer data. It could be your CRM or ERP system, depending on the industry you're in. It could be a patient system. In the legal profession, it's the document management system that you use. CPAs have a myriad of applications that they use. So is this data backed up? So is it already an application that's sitting in the cloud so that it's backed up automatically and backed up off-site? Is it on a server that's in your closet at your local location? Are those databases being backed up? So that bulk of storage that's sitting there, your archive data. Does your industry have a compliance issue where you've got to hang on to email and data for a certain amount of time, whether it be a year, 2 years, 10 years, depending upon the industry? Is there archive data, just your past email, sales orders, purchase orders that you have issued that you need to hang on to? So which data do you need to be able to back up? What's going to hurt you if you don't have it during downtime? Second question, and equally as important, how often do you need to back up? Are you an industry that settles your books at the end of the day each day, and so doing a backup at night each night is sufficient? Could be, and that's all that you need. We're getting more and more today, especially as technology is a bigger part of our business, where we almost have to do hourly or every other hour backups because the data changes so much. Now, you don't go and do a full backup every 60 minutes, but it's incremental. What has changed from an hour ago? And so that way your backup stays current. And in some cases, it's as often as 15 or 20 minutes, depending on what your requirements are, how often you're turning over conversations with, again, clients, patients, suppliers, and customers. So that's how you want to think about your backup. How often does that need to be addressed? And then the disaster half of the backup and disaster recovery is the policy of where is it? If you have a backup on site, that's great. It is absolutely a step one. It is absolutely better than not having a backup. The better solution, and where the DR piece comes in, is moving a copy of that elsewhere. In the old days, we would do tape backups and take the tape off site. Maybe we'd rotate 3 or 4 of those. We put it in a fireproof safe and all kinds of fancy stuff. Well, the reality was the fire wasn't what damaged the tapes, it was the heat. So your fireproof safe is awesome, and your tape will not have caught on fire. It will, however, be melted. But those kinds of things today are avoided by moving a copy of your data either to a second site if you have multiple locations, or more preferably into the cloud. So that backup doesn't have to be done every 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe that is nightly. Maybe it does have to be sooner, but you're able to make those decisions, and you want to put that generally at a site that is in a different geographic area, so that moving your second copy to the other side of town can't be affected by the same storm, the same flood, the same batch of lightning, that kind of thing. And then it's, where do you keep it? It has to be accessible, has to be a fast enough connection that you can upload quickly. It's got to preferably be somewhere that allows you to keep, as most do, a full copy of your system, not just the data. And what I mean by that is you're probably going to want to do your files for your operating system and your system files, as well as just the data. For example, you back up your phone, it keeps your pictures and that sort of thing, it moves them to the cloud. That's great. You get a new phone, the same operating system, you pull them back down. Doesn't really work the same way with backing up a server. You're going to want to pull down the server operating system, the version of that operating system, the service pack that it is, and bring all that back down to a bare metal machine, and then reconstitute that data from the beginning. So you're not just backing up those pictures and documents, you're backing up the databases, you're backing up the operating system files, you're backing up your other system files. So keep in mind that this site where you're putting it has to be robust enough to handle all of that, and just as importantly, a connection fast enough to bring them back down, so that it doesn't take you 24 hours, it takes you 3 or 4 hours to get everything downloaded. Next, you move to recovery policy, and it's really the same issue. Once you have your data stored, you want to talk about how you will bring it back down and restore it. I use the term reconstitute or rehydrate, because that's really what you're doing. You're taking compressed data stored in the cloud or in a backup, even on site, and then you're blowing that back up to full speed that you can work with it in its normal format. So we want to make sure we talk about where we put it, make sure we can keep the right copy and the right version, the right format of that data. And then, as we talked about previously, we want to be able to test that backup. Certainly every 6 months to a year. Again, we recommend quarterly. If you don't have a recovery policy in place, here are a few of the bits of language that you're going to want to consider and think about. We'll begin with the recovery time objective, and this is sort of looking into the future. Okay, how quickly do you need your data back? If you've got an outage and you've got a downtime, if you're back by tomorrow morning, are you okay? A lot of you are. If a manufacturing environment, you're able to continue to manufacture and to ship, and then you'll record from paper back into electronic format the next morning. Same thing happens in some other industries, but then you've got some that have a highly transactional nature, or you're seeing patients in a doctor's office or a dentist's office, and you're constantly doing the x-rays You're constantly looking at results and data, and that needs to be stored, and you need that back as quickly as you can, because your transaction might be a 30-minute appointment. Certainly there's scheduling issues and scheduling software involved with that. So how much downtime can you afford before your business is greatly affected by the formulas we used in the first couple of slides? So that's your recovery time objective. We look also at the recovery point objective, and that's looking backward. Okay, how far back in time do you need to go? So the greatest example of this, if you do have an incident with ransomware and you don't know exactly when it happened, you need to be able to go far enough back to grab that data before the incursion occurred, before the breach occurred. Otherwise, you're going to reinstall data that's already infected. So that's one of the key things to consider. How far back do you need to go? How much time can you afford to lose from a data standpoint? Do you have hard copies of transactions for the last 24 hours? So therefore, going back 24 hours means a little bit of extra work, but no true loss of functionality. It may be, again, if you're in that highly transactional environment, it's an hour, it's 30 minutes because of the number of people come into a retail location or possibly a law firm, a CPA office, anything that has a high level of transactional nature to it. So you need to determine how far back in time you need to go. So your recovery time objective, recovery point objective determines the forward and the backward of how you need to look at your backup and your disaster recovery process. And then in a longer sense, and this is more leaning toward the backup itself, but you're also going to want to store this offsite in case you need to recover, is what are you archiving? Again, are you in a compliance-driven industry where you're subject to HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley? There are probably 4 or 5 other ones we could come up with that might affect your business. Or do you need to be NIST compliant, which is more of a security structure? So therefore, how long do you need to hold on to those backups? How long do they need to be available? Is it testimony from a trial? Is it interview footage, video footage? If you're in the FBI or law enforcement, how long do you need to track footage from those interrogation rooms? If you're in law enforcement, is there dash cam video? Those kinds of things that you have to think about. And then that's usually going to be driven by compliance, and you're simply following that. So your backup has to last you, the storage has to last you long enough to hit those archive guidelines. I would probably suggest that you don't want to store the archive data in as fast a storage location as you do your critical business data. What that means is you don't want to put stuff at Microsoft Azure or AWS, from Amazon, or at Google that's just going to sit around and sit still for 3 years until you need it. That can go into what's called cold storage. It's quite a bit less expensive. It's not as fast, but if you're just pulling down, a file from 3 years ago, probably doesn't matter if it takes a couple years to download the whole thing. You're able to live with that. So you want to think in those terms. Another tip is you archive your files and you look at how to do your backups, is you want to keep it as clean as possible. We archive off whatever we can, freeing up room on the server, whether it sits on your site or whether it sits in the cloud, freeing up room in your own site backup device, freeing up room so that your transfer of data via the internet is faster. So it gives you a smaller footprint, it gives you cleaner data, and it helps you with the speed and the time that's involved in the backup process. So as we go through and think about those, what does it cost you? How does it happen? What do we do to prevent it? From a backup and a network perspective, we want to take a look at that periodically. And so my suggestion would be that we do some sort of review on probably a quarterly basis. Here at TCS, we're able to do a disaster recovery review. It is something that we're offering with this presentation today. If you're interested in doing that, please contact us. Your initial review it comes at no cost because it's beginning the process in your mind and sort of guiding you through that. So there's nothing that we're doing more than just consulting those first meetings. So please feel free to contact us today at the disaster recovery review session, and let us know how we can begin that process for you. And I think that's going to conclude the formal part today. Certainly, if there are questions, I think we've seen a couple of them that come in. So I'm going to turn it back over to Eddie and let him ask those questions that have come in. And if you have any more, please feel free to insert those via the chat function.
Thank you, Andy. We'll go ahead and take some time for our questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box on your control panel. So we already have a question. Question asks, how can I avoid ransomware or phishing email attacks that could cause downtime?
It's a great question. Thank you, Eddie. We went through a couple of those examples, during the presentation. Those occur most often when somebody within your organization clicks on an email that contains a malicious link. It could be a file attachment, but it's something that launches malicious code. Now that code could be instantaneously, it can begin to encrypt the data sitting on your server. That is the true ransomware model. It could be something benign and that installs a bit of code on your machine, which eventually finds its way through the network and that can populate all of the PCs or get to the servers in your environment. And it's almost more insidious because you don't know it's there. It may do something as simple as collect data, keystroke data. It may be just simply viewing emails and creating an email forwarding rule. So it's seeing all the forwarded email. And at that case, they're collecting that data so they can use it in a later follow-up attempt. And maybe it's a false attempt to get a wire transfer. Maybe it's an example where they want you to pay a fraudulent invoice. So the ways to prevent that really come down to people. Just as we talked one of our first slides about social engineering, which are the malicious actors on the outside, all you need to do is to train your people on the inside. We've got a product that we use that does email education, email training, what to look for, how to tell if a link is real or not, what are some tips to find both in the format and the style and the messaging within an email. So if you're wanting to train your people, please give us a call. Let us know how we can help out with that. And I would say the best example for stopping ransomware or phishing attacks is simply through education. Eddie, I think we've got time for one more question. If you've got another, please let me know.
We do have one more question. It asks, do I need to keep backups on site or in the cloud?
Perfect, and it's a great note to wrap up on. As we discussed as we went through the presentation, you really need to do both. And I'll give you an example of how they work hand in hand with each other. At TCS, our backup solution that we recommend for our clients and is used by the majority of our clients has an on-site component, and it is a piece of hardware that sits on your site, and it's doing that backup. So your backup, again, it's your files, it's your system files, it's your operating system. We do that on whatever time or whatever schedule you prefer, whether it's by the 15 or 20 minute increment or an hour or once a day. And it's on your site. So if you need to grab something quickly, it's there. I've deleted an email, I've deleted a document. I need an example of a patient record, a sales order, a purchase order. You're able to go and retrieve that very quickly and find that document or that email locally at the speed of your network. The second copy then goes to the cloud. And this could be done, again, hourly, daily, nightly, even weekly, depending on what your needs are. But you're sending that offsite, and it's not there to go get that email back. It's there in case a disaster occurs, if a server fails, if a hard drive goes bad, you're then able to pull that back down. So the answer in a true backup / disaster recovery environment, you're going to have a local copy, and then you're also going to have a cloud copy. So in answer to that question, it's important to have both, but most critical is that you have a backup somewhere of some sort. And again, we'd be more than happy to discuss that as part of the DR review that we have with you. So thank you guys for your time. Again, I'm Andy Purcell with TCS. Feel free to reach out. More than happy to discuss it with you. And thank you all for your time today. Eddie, thank you for your your moderation, and I will hand it back over to you.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thanks for joining us again today, and we'll see you next time.